Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 76 of Confessions of a Market Maker. I'm your co-host, Ray, aka All Day Ray, aka Chateau Raymond, and I'm joined here by my suave co-host, former market maker, 20 years, and current day retail trader, the man who's giving you a peek behind the curtain, the man who's taught you how to think like a villain, a man who's bitten more poisonous fruit than Adam and Eve, the 4-plate bench presser, JJ. How's it going?
Good, Ray. Good, Ray. But I never did 4 plates. So I could never crack 4.
I don't know. What's your buddy Omni? I don't know. He says otherwise.
Oh, jeez. Well, he wears one of those bench shirts, of course, you know.
Yeah. And the Crocs to the gym. I could never. I can't support that, but you know, to each their own. To each their own.
I can't. The Crocs, I can't deal with it. No.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I see a lot. I see it as a trend since he brought it up. I'm seeing people at my gym wearing it. I don't know what it is, but
oh, really?
You know, not to derail this podcast. And our guest today is one of my favorite individuals to conversate with in the known universe. She's gentle, kind, intelligent, genuine, a coach to traders and executives of alike, author of the Wall Street Coach and host of Wall Street Coach Podcast. And she's made the courageous move from the big city to the big island. I'm talking about the ever gracious Kim Ann Curtin. Kim, how's it going?
Going great. How are you, Ray? How are you, JJ?
Great.
Doing great. So awesome to have you back. You know what? About a year since we last had you on, episode 46 for the listeners. If you guys haven't listened, please go back. I thought we had a great conversation on a lot of different topics. So I suggest you guys go back and listen to it. And in that meantime, I've had the honor to be a guest on your podcast, yes, Kim, which was a lot of fun. I had a great time, but you set me up, to be honest, because I had to follow up Matthew McConaughey, like the Matthew McConaughey, the actor. I'm sure all the listeners know. Kim, that's a tough act to follow. I mean,
you know, Ray, anybody could handle it. It's you.
Too kind. What were your takeaways? Well, for one, I love the podcast and I love him. I read his book, Green Lights. He's a fascinating character. This guy, he's in tune. What were your takeaways for talking to him?
You know, the takeaways of talking to him were the same takeaways from reading his book. His comfort with self-reflection, his comfort with being, he's comfortable in his skin of being a human. He doesn't have inappropriate expectations on himself. And what that inspires for me personally is that when you don't have these really high expectations of yourself, you know, you have goals, you have things you want to reach for, but then when you potentially fall short of them, you are not as likely to beat the hell out of yourself. And so that's what I think he really inspired for me personally was, wow, here's a guy who's self-reflective, looking at the shadow sides that he has within himself, but not sitting in judgment of them, but curiosity. And then that facilitates his ability to transform them.
Yeah. And I feel like that can like lead into potentially what we're going to talk about today, about the traders index, or, you know, I know you've
trader positioning index,
because I think that's something, you know, me and you've talked about with, you know, myself personally, maybe having high expectations of oneself and how that can, yes, you know, be detrimental in certain aspects. And we'll touch on that.
For sure.
And just, you know, just a reminder to listeners, if you guys would like to join JJ and myself and a supportive community of traders, you join us at microefutures.com. And so, Kim, before we jump into all of that, just briefly, you know, for listeners who are, you know, first getting to know you or wondering, I know a lot of times people don't even know what a coach is. Well, what does a coach do? Do you mind just, you know, maybe speaking to that and maybe, you know, what you do when you work with clients?
Sure, you got it. You know, my first exposure to coaches was when I was working in finance. I was very generously compensated, but I didn't feel that I was doing my full expression of myself. I felt bored is really the best word for it. I wasn't really being challenged at the level that I knew was possible. And so I hired a coach, an executive coach at the time, to really help myself reconcile with this desire for more. And it wasn't so much more money, although I'm sure that was part of it, but also just that sense of more utilization of my skill set. And that coach and that experience was so profound that it opened up my eyes to becoming a coach. So I've been a coach 15 years, and I have primarily worked with those in the finance world. My company is called the Wall Street Coach, and that is to work with those who are in finance or as traders. Especially the last 2 years, we've done so much work with traders, because I think this volatility is, and I think also the younger population is realizing, wow, if I get what's between the ears, navigated properly, then my trading improves. So it's ultimately a coach is going to help every individual they work with to find a way to be as neutral in the middle of volatility as possible. You're going to have your reactions because you're a human being, but coaching will teach you how to come back to center and not overvalue or undervalue key pieces as a trader you need to be connected to.
Absolutely, 100%. And I know when you first started off, you worked with probably like higher net worth individuals. I know you still do, but then you also, as you progressed, you kind of got into working with some like retail traders. And I'm just a little bit curious if you've seen any like, I guess like similarities between them, but I'm imagining there's some differences and maybe with things that they struggle with or they excel at.
Yeah. There's a lot that they have in common because they're both dealing with, the most competitive game in the world, right? The market, the volatility, I think that retail day traders go through is in a way a lot. There's a different tax, so to speak, mental tax, emotional tax, because when you're a retail trader, you work for yourself. It's all you, you don't have anybody. Plus, it's very lonely. It can be very isolating. It can be very hard to have anybody who understands what that day-to-day is like, so that you are not able to articulate your challenges and have somebody give you empathy at the end of the day. And just as painful is when you have great success, you can't really share that either, because people will misunderstand it or be jealous or confused or think, you're just a baller all the time. And you're like, no, these days that I do well make up for the days that I lose. But then you can't get into that whole conversation. So I think there is a different kind of pressure on a retail day trader than there is for somebody who's an institutional trader. But look, everybody has their challenges, but I think, look, if you're a retail trader, God bless you, because you have taken on a very challenging path.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, no, I think the bit that stand out to me is like you're talking about how lonely it can be at times. And at least the people like I know in my everyday life, and I think back to like when I played poker, there was always this like no one understood like really what I did, and I would have to, thank God that the advent of online and the internet and stuff, and there's like people you could communicate that way, or like especially with trading. That's what I like about trading. Like it's way more supportive. It's like you can be in the same trades with people. It doesn't seem as competitive as at least poker was.
Yep.
But yeah, that's I think a huge point. JJ, you've I know something we talk about a lot, like the differences. Well, what have you seen being on both sides?
Bad. Retail's way harder. It's just, there's just, you're really out there. You're in a war where other people have Exocet missiles and Harrier jump jets and and all this ordnance and destroyers, and you're out there with a plastic spoon. So you have to really pick your battles, and it's like almost like guerrilla tactics. You have to get in, steal what you can and get the hell out. Especially in markets with price action like we have now. It's not the easiest time to learn how to trade. So I find retail a lot more difficult than institutional, because all you're doing is you're directing the order flow and you're in charge, as opposed to trying to figure out what somebody like me is doing.
Yeah.
And we have our tools, but if you don't have discipline, oh my God. I mean, so many desk traders have no discipline at all, because we just surf order flow. We're complete degenerates. They come in, I mean, you see these guys coming in hungover and stuff like that, and they're still making good money, because they're executing traders. It's completely different. Completely different. It's one of the most humbling things I've ever done in my life was to be a retail trader. It takes you down a notch. Like it takes you down a peg instantly.
Yeah. That humility is so powerful. I think that's such a important point. And in a way, that's why I feel like this is such a school of consciousness, right? Like trading is the ultimate mirror. You are going to get what you give, and it forces you every day to be with that. And how can that not be humbling? How can that not be?
Truly. And also, I think the thing is, when you don't get anything and you give it, don't get anything, how to deal with that is, it's really soul crushing, because especially if you're not getting something, or you're not understanding something, you start questioning everything about yourself. Right?
Totally. But this would be the place that I would point somebody. If it is soul crushing, then you need to pull back and start to practice more neutrality, because that tells me then that person who might feel completely crushed, they're looking possibly for their sense of worthiness through their P&L, through the way the market reacts or responds to them. And we can't put our sense of self-worth in that, because we are completely then at its mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Kim, what do you, one of my favorite authors, Ryan Holiday, he writes on stoicism, but like philosophy in general. And I love one of the titles of his book and the book itself, The Obstacle is the Way.
Yeah. Great title.
And I'm sure we've talked on this, but I think for traders, especially like embracing the obstacle or the struggle or the areas that you're weak in, the obstacle's the way. I guess it kind of speaks for itself.
For sure. But I think that's really hard to ask people to do when they haven't been taught the distinction between those parts of themselves that are unpleasant. Most of us, when we've had to even see things about ourselves that are less than ideal, our culture and often the family we come from has shamed us for that, has made us wrong, has kind of pulled love and belonging away from us. So it's hard, I find, for people to be able to wrap their arms around a willingness to look for their shadow stuff, because they're so afraid that they won't get to belong anymore, as if they're one on their own. But no, each of us human beings have shadow side to us. Each of us have places where we're not our ideal self. But if we don't make ourselves wrong for that or feel ashamed, then we can be much more willing to step into curiosity and be like, that's how I showed up. Let's say I yelled at that guy who passed me on the road. Isn't that, instead of beating myself up, I shouldn't have yelled at him, I shouldn't have cursed at him, I shouldn't have given him the finger. If instead we're willing to say, I wonder how come that really pulls up such a reaction to me. I have a much better chance now at changing that behavior than if I make myself feel ashamed for it. And that's what traders, I find, do a lot. They make mistakes, there's a big blow up, and then they beat the hell out of themselves. I'm like, that's not going to give you what you need to not have it happen again. That will actually keep you repeating the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah. So how does one cultivate the observer self, I guess?
Yes, that's a great word for it. what couple of ways. I do believe that meditation and stillness and a pausing, call it what you will, is important to your development. I do think most day traders are very diligent about keeping their diary about their trades, but very infrequently do those journals keep track of their emotional states when they've been triggered. No traders coming to their trading desk without other factors. Are you, this pandemic, especially a lot of more people sometimes are in the house, right? Kids have been home from school. Elders need caretaking. Our responsibilities exist. And I think sometimes traders have a tendency to think, oh, I'm just going to trade and all of my personal life won't come with me, but it does come with you. And if you haven't observed, oh, I'm really being stressed personally, well, then you're going to be unconscious to how that stress shows up in your work side, in your trading side. So first step is start to notice what are the things that are pulling on you all day? What are the challenges you're in the midst of personally and professionally? Because that is you just taking yourself a little bit above and looking down from the mountain over your life. That's one answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and pardon the some construction going on.
Yeah.
So as that construction was going on, and I was talking about this, I was trying to myself. I was stressed. I was like, I can't believe that noise is happening now. When I talked to the two construction workers about that doing it after this time. And so in that moment, that was a great example of me trying to practice what I preach. Like, okay, it's happening. I'd rather it not be happening. Lucky for me, Ray knows that, I would not have that happening if I could stop it. So I had to kind of find my center, even though I was in the middle of talking. I had to come back to center. And that's what every trader can practice. You're in the middle of a really scary moment, come back to center. Holy shit, I didn't think this was what was going to happen. This is a surprise. Okay, how do I come back to center? So now I can respond instead of react. We're all going to have those moments, but and this is a practice, right? You don't do it once and you're done. It's a practice of neutrality, a practice of observing.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's good to see it. I think like these concepts getting more traction, because I think what we're talking about, Kim, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of more Eastern philosophy, I guess you would say. So I think a lot of times people, America, Western side of the world, are a little bit resistant, but I think people are really seeing the value in this and in the practicality in it as well, which I think is great, because that's what it's all about, practice, right? We can sit here and talk about it all we want, and I think it's the same thing with trade. That's the beautiful thing about trading too. And I was talking to someone about this today. It's like, and it was a new trader, like 2 months in, and wants to spout out to me all these different books they read and videos, and I'm like, that's great, but you don't have the experience. You like, it's when game day comes, it's totally different.
Yeah.
And you got to cultivate both. You can't just rely on your book knowledge. Like, you need to get out there and do it as well. And that's what I love about everything we're talking about, is like, you have to, but you have to practice this, and it's all about the practice and the experience.
Whenever I've talked to a trader who's telling me, they don't have discipline, what I'll say to them is in their trading, like, I don't have discipline in my trading. And I'll say, well, what's your discipline look like in your personal life? And they're like, well, why do we have to talk about that? I was like, well, are you a man or woman of your word? Do you fly off the handle? Whoever flies past you on the road? Like, do you see evidence of discipline in your personal life? And if the answer is no, what makes you think the second you start trading, you're going to suddenly be this expert in discipline?
Yeah.
Right, JJ?
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I only get disciplined when I want something, and I'll do it. But then the other times I won't. And I took for granted that, because I'd had the discipline to do, build a career institutionally. So I thought, this retail would be, that's no problem at all. But then, you have the discipline to sit and wait because you have to react. You have to respond, and that's really interesting what you said. Respond instead of react, and have that. I think a lot of people, which I see right now, I see a huge amount of impatience and the willingness to sit back and actually observe and learn. Um, I don't, people really find that hard because it's not like it's something else. It's about money. So everybody thinks if you're sitting there and you're not making money, you're not working, even though you're trying to learn how to make money.
Yep.
And they will not be in a trade and as soon as they go into a trade, it's like a dog. Their brain is just not thinking about learning at all because it's against, if you say anything that's against what their position is, it's just,
they're so attached. So attached, and they're so attached because their identity and their self-worth is tied up in that trade.
Yeah.
And this is also the culture we live in now. It's a culture of instant gratification. If you're bored, what do people do? They grab their phones. We have not, the culture and the technology is moving in such a clip that unless you have a practice of where you don't receive instant, immediate gratification, then you are constantly at the beck and call of the dopamine fix. You're constantly looking for the dopamine fix. And that nuance of learning that you're talking about, like, hey, maybe this trade is wrong, but see what you can learn. They're like, no, I need my dopamine fix. And you're like, but the dopamine isn't going to solve the long-term lesson here that you could potentially learn.
Yeah.
And
it's funny because I just it's very odd to me because I was raised in the business. So when people don't look at it as a business, I just find that fascinating. And it becomes about, sort of like an addiction kind of a thing. And I'm like, well, no, it's like a business.
It's an addiction.
Yeah.
It's not like an addiction. It's an
It
addiction.
is, yeah. But you don't realize it.
Dopamine.
Yeah,
it's action.
Yeah.
The dopamine addiction is action. And look, this is happening not just for traders. This is happening for anybody who has a mobile device. You are constantly having the ability to be stimulated. And when you get that over and over and over again, you crave more of it, even though your day-to-day satisfaction decreases. Your deep sense of like belonging decreases. So we've got this constant ability to get our dopamine fix without having a prescription, right? And yet we're feeling more lonely, more isolated, more depressed cohort than we've ever been. Brene Brown talks about this in her talks. That is because we're not in this practice of waiting for reward. And that is what I think, traders really are forced to bump into right away, which is part of why, I have a collection of ebooks, but your listeners, guys, I'm going to give them for free a book on trader discipline. It's just go to traderdiscipline.com and it's like a 30-page book, but it talks about how discipline ultimately is there's layers underneath. It's like, the iceberg that like looks like it's this big on top, but underneath it's so much bigger. And that part of it is that concern around how do I learn how to not have instant fix? And meditation is one of the practices. I know, Ray, that you meditate. What happens to you when you don't meditate? Do you find your trading changes?
Yeah, I am more reactionary. And instead of just being more full of being the observer, I'm more reacting. I am like quick to be frustrated. My son annoys me. Hey, what are you doing? Like I'm just as opposed to I don't have like that step back. And and we were talking about this on the phone earlier about all the different inputs that society brings now. And we were talking about even just like the kids growing up and like me raising my son, like in this type of environment. We're all have it right now. We have all these different inputs coming from everywhere. And I think like me, I can only talk for myself. I need to step back. I need to shut off. And like, that's what meditation does to me. And I've just seen the benefits for myself. And yeah, like for me to be my best self, I need to be doing that practice. And yeah. So that's,
there's something you asked me before about, how does somebody begin to practice that neutrality? One of the ways that I usually recommend people consider it is the realization that there is sometimes this inner voice within us that is an inner gremlin or an inner critic. And it usually is a voice that doesn't make us feel good about ourselves. So a lot of times, especially at the beginning of coaching with somebody, I'll suggest that they consider reading Taming Your Gremlin, because that book helps us identify that internal voice that tells us we should have, we would have, could have, should have. And those phrases, once you start to pay attention to the gremlin voice, that voice that is a naysayer to you all the time, that also facilitates an awareness of that intuition voice, that higher self voice. But sometimes they're so collapsed in the beginning of self-awareness work, people can be a little confused about, well, is it the inner gremlin that's telling me I should sleep in today? Or is that my higher self? And, it's hard to understand the difference between those voices until you start paying attention. But it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be very simple.
Yeah.
Just start to observe yourself and be conscious of like how you react, and or when you do respond, what's happening underneath both of those ways of showing up.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting point you bring up, because that was something like, it's like, oh, well, is this just like my monkey mind talking? Is this like, my real self talking? And I think that's why it's just like, just practice, so in my case, just meditate, just sit, and like things will resolve themselves. And I guess even bringing it back to what we were talking about between like, I could read about these things all day, and I love reading, I love reading, and I love all that stuff, but you also need to practice. You need to go out and do it as well.
That's
and
right.
like, just,
sure.
And like, these things will, I guess, resolve themselves somewhat. And I think something that really helped me that I came across recently, Kim, was talking about like using your brain, like your brain as the tool, not like having your brain use you in essence. And like, I think that's what meditation helps me with as well.
For sure. You become the driver of the brain, as opposed to that brain driving you. And one of the spiritual teachers, I have many spiritual teachers, but one of them is Eckhart Tolle. And he speaks about in The Power of Now, and his other book is A New Earth. He talks about how there is often, from pain that we've lived through, there's something he calls the pain body. And the pain body is this kind of experience that will keep us kind of locked in negativity, locked in seeing the glass half empty. And he talks about too, the only way we begin to start to notice that is through observation, and that we realize that we aren't so much caught up in the detail, but to just pull yourself back a little bit and be like, oh, isn't that fascinating? I'm thinking these thoughts right now. Isn't it fascinating that I have resistance to listening to JJ's advice when I'm in a trade, right? Isn't that fascinating? What is that about? Start to be curious. Curious and neutrality are the most important words when it comes to wanting to increase your self-awareness. Are you able to meet yourself in neutrality and with curiosity? Don't be so judgmental of yourself. That allows you to be able to see things about yourself that perhaps are costing you, right? There are inhibitors, invisible inhibitors that we are all in the midst of every day. If we're not conscious to what they are, they're going to cost you more than you probably want.
Yeah. I always remember the phrase you told me, less certainty, more curiosity, or vice versa. Maybe I bungled it, but yeah, I always liked that saying. Yeah.
Be less certain and more curious.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. And that's a great, and that's so applicable to trading. Like once you think you have it is like the time you're, it's just not a good place, in to be a trader. And I think this is a good way to segue into the traders index. Is that what you're calling it?
Trader positioning index.
Trader positioning index. Which, I guess, talking to like our minds, our brains, and maybe the delusions we tell ourselves,
the judgments,
the judgments. And this was one of the things. And I even think I first took it in March, you told me, right? That's when I took it. Yep. I thought it was, revealing then, but now me looking at it again, I picked up some things, because even some things might I even been resistant to in March and been like, oh, well, for example, what discipline and organization, I scored not relatively well compared to my the other scores, and it might need some work.
But on the self side, let's just clarify that, that on the work side, very strong with your discipline, but on the self side, it was asking for some attention. And so that is an indicator. And let me just say that Ray gave me permission to speak about this before anybody hears me saying it. But it indicates that you could be putting other people's needs that are in your life ahead of your own.
Yeah. And it was funny to just, we were talking on the phone and we're going over some of these things, and you're like, oh, well, cause I was like, what? Like, I think I'm a disciplined person. I think, I know I'm not the greatest organizer or whatever. You're like, well, like maybe your workspace could be a little messy. And I'm like looking around, I'm like, oh shit, I got coffee mugs everywhere, my papers, and just like things like, things like that. But, totally. I was like, I'm like, okay, like, yeah, I mean, there's areas for improvement. And I've always been one. It's like, I don't think I'm like scared to go after these areas. And I think like, these are the obstacles, the way like to go about it. If we want to make improvements, I think these are the things we have to,
for sure. And that's, we all have, a collection of, how we view the world, and I'm just always curious for my own self-development to understand where are those inhibitors, and not just inhibitors, but where do I have excellent judgment? Where can I trust myself more? Where can I not question my judgment? Because, for myself, I've done this consulting coaching for 15 years. In the beginning, I could see the results my clients were creating for themselves, but there was a part of me that was probably like, well, who am I to have these impacts, especially with people who are at much more higher level positions, or certainly financially in a different kind of bracket than I am at. There was a part of me like, wow, how can I do this for these people who are so successful? But when I did the judgment, index for myself, the trader positioning index for myself, I was like, this is how, because I have excellent, ability to see the big picture. And so I think especially for traders, it is game changing to understand what does your judgment look like? I mean, it shows us over 70 different indicators of a person's judgment. In my opinion, I would never step into trading without knowing my score for it, because it's going to tell me right away, am I built for this? Some people aren't built for it, and that's okay, but better to know that than before you lose your whole account. And what is it that you need to develop for you to be able to succeed at this? Because if you don't have discipline on the work side, then you're going to potentially have a very long uphill climb.
Yeah, absolutely. And, before we jump into maybe some specifics on these, and then, because, I think for the listeners, we need to make the distinction between the work side, the personal side of the index as well. But I guess Kim, maybe, backtrack, like, what goes into this? How is this judged? How is this calculated? Just give us a little rundown on that.
It's one of the most mathematical scientific tools out there. It was created by Dr. Hartman, who was a contemporary of Abraham Maslow. Maslow was fascinated by needs that were, in regards to human development and satisfaction. And Hartman was fascinated with people's judgment. The reason I decided to get certified in this, and my team as well, is because we were finding that a lot of people do personality assessments or IQ assessments. This is not that, because in my experience, I had taken quite a lot of assessments when I was in finance just to get the positions I was applying for. But I have to say, after you take them a bunch of times, you know what they're asking you. You know what the answer is they want to hear. So I think some of those are easy to game, so to speak. But also understanding somebody's personality is not the same as understanding somebody's judgment. It's a radically different, but the judgment is going to tell you everything you need to know. And like from, let's say, a person walking into this room and seeing a wire on the floor, are they going to see the wire, notice it at all? Are they going to move the wire out of the way for the next person? Or are they going to just completely trip over it? That is the granularity this assessment can give. And it speaks to our ability to interact with people, our ability to have work ethic, be tactically able to work, plow through things, which I think for traders is going to be a necessary ingredient. And then big picture, your ability to see the consequences of your actions. The people who have taken it thus far, they've been blown away at what it speaks to. And the self side, what's so fascinating to me, because I've been a coach for a long time, I've always known the self side informs the work side. But when people have this put in front of them, most people, our self side is compromised because we are in a culture where work is escalated. It's always, raised up. So most people look at this and they're like, whoa, look at that self side. I have to give that a little more attention. But that self side is the foundation that work side sits upon. And the people who think I can just do all work and not worry about the self side, they are going to have cracks in the foundation at some point, be it health, be it relationships, be it personal satisfaction. So I love that it helps people see right away, oh, that self side is actually these strong legs that the rest of my work side sits upon.
Yeah. That was like the first thing that stuck out to me, because I've always believed that the, your personal side and your work side intercorrelate. And so I was a little surprised when it came back, and I was like, scored well with the work side, but the personal,
very well. Very well.
Yeah, thank you. The self side was, not as good.
Inhibited.
And I was, and I've always, and this was probably, and I know me and you've talked personally to like the spiritual side of things, and how like one can get like an ego maybe spiritually or something like that. And I've always thought of like, I've always, pride myself in like trying to be balanced. And it's like, well, I guess there's some things I actually still need to work on here. Maybe I need to, step back, drop that a little bit, which I thought was interesting. But you also told me that most people, and being a product of maybe Western society, that you say rarely anyone's personal side is better than the work side, correct?
Rarely. Why? Yeah. Because most of us are encouraged by the work ethic, right? Yeah. I heard this gentleman on another podcast the other day say something fascinating. He said, we have countless podcast conversations about discipline around productivity. He said, but almost none on relationships, friendships, lovers, to ourselves. He said, and that too is evidence of this work ethic culture. Everything is productivity. Are you working hard enough, fast enough? Are you being disciplined enough? And he said, and yet if we don't have those relationships, it doesn't matter how much we work or how much money we have, we're not going to be happy. So it's the nature of this culture of ours that always puts the focus on work, raises it above all else. But the challenge is, even when the work scores are so strong as yours are, if we don't practice self-care enough, if we don't address those different dynamics, like, just being perhaps athletic or running or taking care of our exercise in whatever way, or our nutrition, all of those are the foundations that all of that work stuff potentially gets compromised, because that foundation, the foundation of the house, that has to be the strongest. Besides how the house is built, if you build that house on sand, you're not going to have a house that stands for long. And that's what I try to say to people. Look at that self side is the what's underneath the house you're building for your trading, for your work. Know that is what it sits upon. Is that getting your attention at least as much as the work side is?
Right. And I'm gonna ask some of your thoughts on it, JJ. As I know you took it.
Yeah, I took it.
I just let me. I just want to say one thing
Yeah,
before I lose
go
my
ahead,
train
go
of thought
ahead.
here,
Yeah,
and then we'll throw it to you.
Sure.
Because one of the things, I guess, like on the self side, Kim, I thought was intriguing, and then like talking through it, it made a lot more sense to me. And I forget exactly what the metric was, but it was indicating that I might I'm tough on myself. I set myself to higher standards, maybe unrealistic standards, and
Yes.
so in turn, I might be lacking self-esteem in certain areas or something like that. And so confidence. And so what that actually, what I kind of like realized is that didn't allow me to accept my high scores and like believe that I had
correct
strengths in areas. Because like, well, like you even alluded to before, like, well, how me like having those type of scores. And
That's
so
right.
I thought that was, I just thought that was interesting tidbit that really like stood out to me.
And that's part, and we just saw it in real time. You have incredibly strong scores, incredibly rare, unusually strong scores, Ray. And when you referenced it a minute ago, you made it sound as though, your scores on the, like you put your emphasis, even in the way you described it a minute ago, on where you were lacking, ignoring that there's this huge chunk of strength. And that is what happens when the dial is called self-image. And that is when we set an expectation of ourselves that is out of this world. And so our ability to reach an out of this world goal is probably not going to happen. And so what happens is then we start to self-criticize. We start to not feel as good about ourselves. Look at that, you loser. You didn't reach that goal. That among new traders is so common. I see often where they're like, I should be making this much in a month. I'm like, what are you, a superhero or Marvel comic superhero? Like, but many of us do this. I myself, my self-image also, when I did this score, ridiculously high. And because those are impossible standards, rarely do I meet up to it. And then my self-esteem and self-confidence will be low. And so you can see, oh, that has taught me when I create goals. Now I look at the goal and I'm like, maybe it's not in 30 days. Maybe it's in 90.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I don't create goals, but now they're more pragmatic. They're more realistic. And then I have the opportunity to feel better about myself. So that's what's so fascinating to me. It's like the spider web. These things are all interconnected. And so for you to start to give yourself props and have more confidence over the strengths you have, how can that not show up in your trading? If you begin to have confidence that you do have great judgment, how is that not going to let you lean more into what are your strengths? And also like, oh, okay, I'm inhibited by putting really impractical expectations on myself.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. It's really Yeah, it sheds a lot of light. That's for sure. JJ, what did you think? What were some of your takeaways?
I was completely blown away by this. It was just uh I've never really, because you know I kind of was raised in that, like when Tony Soprano went to the doctor, everybody thought he was weak, right? And so we never, and also I have 3 psychiatrists in my family who who just like for fun, like analyzing you like Thanksgiving dinner, right? They just think it's fun to do that, right? Well, they're
Must be fun. Thanksgiving must be fun, huh?
oh yeah, well, I mean, hey, look, maybe they're self-medicating. I don't know, but anyway, there's characters in my family. Anyway, they seriously, so I always just kind of was like, okay, psychology is cool, and I knew about Van Tharp and everything, but I was from the business, right? So like you make the donuts, you sell the donuts. What's the psychology here, right? And then you get to the other side, right, where you don't have the infrastructure, the support, the tools, all of those things that institutional traders have and the order flow.
Yes.
So you're like, oh, okay. And I already kind of went through a little bit of this and fixed myself without knowing anything about psychology, because after 9/11, I lost everything. Right.
Yeah.
I was making, about 300 to 500 grand a month, and, penthouse, 2 Porsches, had the life of Riley. And then, all it takes is for a market to be locked for like 5 days. And then you get bought in on something, and some bad things happen and everything, but you're 28 years old, so you don't know what's, you just, so all of that stuff goes back. And, Mark Douglas in his thing, I remember him saying, how he called the Porsche place and told him to come pick up his Porsche. And I did the same thing too. But after that, right, and I would laugh now, 20 years later.
Yeah.
But after that, my self-esteem was, because my whole identity was being a trader.
Yeah.
Right. And everything was wrapped up in that. And I had worked my ass off to get there, become successful, started from nothing. And then it's just gone.
Yeah.
Right. And then, oh my God, who are you? Right. I'm just JJ, and it's just, that was rough. That was really rough.
It had to be JJ.
Having to face yourself, and there was a lot of us that didn't make it through. I mean, I lost a lot of guys, who couldn't face it, and they stepped in front of trains and stuff, So it's just, so that was really hard. And then you think you're kind of normal. Well, not normal, but you kind of balanced, right? Yeah. And then you take that test yesterday, and I'm like, oh, I'm still doing a lot of this stuff. But this time I'm lying to myself, or not even looking at it, right? Where I just kind of glossing it over, right? Because you're like, oh, I know better than that, right? And then you're like, oh, wow, I really am putting way too much pressure on myself. And also I think after I've been down a couple of times in my life, where, excuse the expression, you don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of.
Nope.
And then you come back from that a couple of times. So I think you always have that, you want to show that you can come back. You want to show that, that you can build it up again, and you put a lot of pressure on yourself, to come back. And I think a lot of traders, because, and traders will do that just on a day-to-day time frame. You take a bad trade, you want to come back from it, right?
Totally.
But it's really, really fascinating. And I think it would have been, it would have been different. I think folks in your profession were sorely needed 20 years ago, because I've just seen so many of my friends, mentors, guys who were making, 200 grand a month. And then, 6 months later, you see them and they're on Skid Row, literally, and it's just because they just can't handle it. And there's nobody to talk to. So they crawl into a bottle or something like that. And it's just, I really wish I had known you 20 years ago, because we could have helped a lot of people.
I think we could have. And, I think that there's still a lot of people out there that need to learn this and understand this for themselves, because, you know, most people are thinking that if they acquire those things that the culture, society, Madison Avenue tells us will make us feel good about ourselves, then they'll have peace. And so those JJ like yourself who have been, you know, to the top and to the bottom and then the top, you know, what happens is you realize, oh, even having all of that money doesn't give you that peace of mind within, or equanimity. Is it nicer having money? In a lot of ways, it's wonderful. I'm not anti-money or success or Lamborghinis, but I know that even having those, if you don't have that internal alliance and a sense of yourself beyond those things, then you will still feel empty, because because it doesn't nourish you. It's you know, I say getting your wants met without getting your needs met, it's like eating Chinese takeout. You're hungry and an hour later because you're not fully nourished.
It's true. It's true. And that I can attest to that, because I'll tell people, you know, I'm what am I think I'm 54 now. And, you know, I tell people there's, you know, there are times I still remember I had like, you know, 8 figures in an account, and I never felt more lonely on a Friday night ever. And then sometimes, you know, when you're like 20 years old or 18 years old, you got $20 in your pocket and you have the time of your life.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
Like it was just the best time of your life. And you didn't, you know, you had $20. You didn't even know how you were going to get home.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And that feeling, you don't get, you know, no matter how many zeros you park behind it.
Well, it's the needs, you know, that's the difference between needs versus wants. And, you know, that's the first thing too that I'll do with a client is ask them, I give them something called the universal needs list. This was created by Marshall Rosenberg. He is the creator of a language called nonviolent communication, NVC for short. And this universal needs list, which you can get anywhere, if you just Google universal needs list, you can look at that and here are some needs off the top of my head that I often see people in today's culture don't have met. They don't get their need for respect met. They don't get their need for community met, certainly after this pandemic for 2 years. Yeah. They don't get their need for to see and be seen. They don't get their need for creativity, certainly not getting their need for adventure met externally, right? Because you can't really travel. Yeah. So when you don't have, and there's so many more that I could speak to, but when you don't have these basic needs met, you're going to have these feelings, apathy, anger, frustration, depression, that those feelings are inevitable when needs are not met. And so what I feel is so important for people is understand what your basic needs are. Your ability to secure them is dependent on you understanding what they are. But if you don't know what they are, how are you going to actually be able to get them met and in turn have the feelings like equanimity, joy, peace of mind? Right? Why would a guy potentially want a Lamborghini? Well, if we're imagining what's underneath that want, what's the need? Respect, maybe, right?
Definitely.
So but what happens if that guy starts to get respect? Does he still have to have the Lamborghini? Maybe not. Maybe he has it because it's fun to have, but he doesn't have to have it because now he feels respect, which was actually driving that want in the first place.
Definitely.
That's what I say, find out for yourself. Because you can get that need met in a lot less costly way. And I don't just mean monetarily, but if respect is the one that you're really searching for, which sometimes for traders it is, they're hoping their P&L will finally earn them their need of respect. And what I want to caution them to is that if you're looking for your respect to come from trading, you're probably going to be left empty-handed, because even the traders at the top of that game, the top of that ladder, their sense of respect is internal or external, isn't coming because they're trading. It's because they have people in their life that respect them, not because they made it, but because of who they are in their day to day.
So the vehicle is just the vehicle for the needs to be met. The what I was thinking while you're saying this, Kim, and this is something I really enjoy about your approach, and I think why we really get along, is I know a lot of people might get turned off by maybe like a spiritual approach to trading, or and I tell those people, stop being pretentious first off, you know what I mean, like, but you have the academic side, you come with that as well, and like so because like you said, the first time you work with clients, you start with the needs, and that's what we did too. And I think now, like, where do the needs, because that's kind of more in the academic realm, correct? Or and like
needs work,
well, like the basic, well, like the universal basic needs, because like if I'm thinking from like a spiritual aspect, does that like correlate? I don't know if I'm trying to like phrase this question in the correct manner, because like I guess if we're talking like from a spiritual aspect, like shouldn't I like want to be more like neutral, or I don't need this, I don't need that, or right, or am I confusing needs with wants?
Such a great question. I hear where you're coming from, because I do believe that there are some spiritual traditions that will request that we deny our human needs. And there is certainly a cultural bent towards, the concept of sin. Like if you look at the 7 deadly sins, those actually are just feelings. Lust, for example, envy, right? These are just feelings. So there are some traditional, let's say, practices or religions more than spiritual. There's some religions or kind of spiritual practices that have advocated that we should really deny our human needs. But I would say, as a spiritual person myself, I don't subscribe to those outlooks. That came about, it's understood. I understood it from what I learned with Marshall Rosenberg to be a domination culture. And a domination culture comes from, some are worthy, some are not. You have to earn your worthiness. And if you haven't earned it, then you're going to suffer. And that is still with us today in the culture. We are living in a domination culture. And that's part of why this philosophy, internal philosophy, is damaging to so many people. And one of the things Rosenberg says is that the word deserve is actually the most dangerous word in the English language, because it implies that there are those who are deserving of, let's say, love and belonging and everything else that comes with it. And there are those who don't deserve it. And if you don't behave, if you don't, do what the power structure tells you to, you will be crushed like a bug. And that forces us into not being individuals who are comfortable with having needs, and further being comfortable with trying to secure and getting them met.
Yeah. It's, I remember first thinking, I was like, man, like how base, like I have needs, like how, like right. I don't have no needs, but like that was my like initial reaction to it, was like, oh, I'm a butt, like,
like as if you are ashamed to have human needs.
Yeah.
I think that rate is way more common than anybody realizes. And, I found when I first looked at this needs list, just because of the way I grew up, I was not encouraged to have needs. I was encouraged to be in tune to other people's needs. I wasn't allowed to have them, and nor were they going to be met potentially in the environment I was in. So what I learned to do is numb myself from my needs. I disconnected myself from my needs, which also means leaving your physical body and going up here to the intellect, where you don't have to be with those discomforts of not having needs. And what does that do? It cuts you off from how much of us is our body. We're just up in our head, thinking our way through things. We're disconnected to so much information, and our whole self is not just our head. Our head would like us to think that, but that's not true.
Yeah, that's why I really like your coaching, because it's not just all like, and I do like academia. Like you said, I love reading and all that, but it's not there's something else.
But academia, Ray, it's fascinating you say that, and I'm flattered and thank you, but I'm an autodidact, which means I'm self-taught. All that I know is from books. I went to Fashion Institute of Technology. I have an associate's degree from FIT, which is why the beginning of this conversation about the Crocs is so upsetting to my ability.
Oh my God. Oh, did I offend you? You wearing Crocs?
No. Never went.
She went to FIT. She went to FIT.
Oh yeah.
Not even the Crocs in my household. I'm not allowed to even see Crocs. They offend me so much. No, I'm just kidding. But the point is, like, I honestly believe, Ray, in a lot of ways, when I first was in finance, I have to say there were a lot of people around me with these very fancy degrees, and I was definitely feeling like, ooh, who am I? And yet I have to say, especially the research I did for my book, Transforming Wall Street, it actually, there it is. Thank you for having it. That book taught me so much, because I wound up reading Adam Smith's book, Theory of Moral Sentiments, which was a hard book to read, not really hard, but just repetitive, but Old English. And I began to see things about the way Adam Smith talked. He's known as the father of capitalism. The way he talked about capitalism was very different than what I thought Adam Smith advocated. His book, The Wealth of Nations, is actually speaking to what all people of a nation have. When you start to read Adam Smith, he was a moral philosopher. You begin to realize he was advocating that what has to happen for a nation is the ability for all to experience wealth, not just a select few. So I thought, because I wasn't an academic, I must be misunderstanding him, because all these people with MBAs are saying that Adam Smith is why they do what they do. So I called Glasgow University, which is where Adam Smith was educated and became a teacher many years ago. And I asked for the expert on Adam Smith. And I was like, hey, what am I missing? He seems to be an advocate of the little guy, as well as, and I was like, what am I missing? He's like, you're not missing anything. I'm like, how can I see this? I don't have this fancy degree. And he's like, because most people don't read Adam Smith, Kim. They just listen to what their professor had to say about it. Yeah. And that they tell them one piece of information. He's like, but you went in and read his books. So not to put a knock against academia, but what I'm trying to say, the book taught me, doing the research myself for my book, is that when you come, and this is also a cautionary tale for traders, when you come from academia, you have a tendency to think right and wrong. This is the way, this isn't the way. You get very black and white because you were rewarded in that system to do it the right way. How do they keep kids in a classroom? Well, you have to make some feel bad to keep order. There's other ways to work with children, but this is our system. Our system of education is set up to be right and wrong. So when you grow up in that, and I've seen a lot of educated traders who come out of having really great degrees, they struggle at the beginning because trading is not black and white. It's 50 shades of that color gray. And that is hard for people who have been rewarded for right and wrong. So for me as an entrepreneur, I believe I've been able to have the success I've had because I didn't come out of that rigid line of thinking.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I wasn't implying that you came from academia, but I know you study and you read, and I know you're very versed in psychology. And I think that's the right way to come, is a good blend of both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about with because the black and whiteness, right? Because life isn't black and white, neither. And that's what's, I've learned a more about life, and we've talked, and we don't have to go down this route. And I've talked about this plenty of times on the podcast. It's like, I've learned more about life. I mean, especially when I started off playing poker, like, and learned about myself from playing poker. And I think that's probably why these things were like, or I was drawn to them, or why this was like my calling, is because like this taught me about, myself, really.
For sure. For sure. It's a heroic journey. Trading is a heroic journey. And those who are able to live with that humbling of it, that JJ spoke about, how it humbles you every day. I mean, how fabulous to have a career that keeps it real for you, that forces you to be with the shadow side of yourself. I mean, it's like the market. Think of the market as Yoda. The market is your Yoda, teaching you where you're attached, teaching where you get too big for your britches, teaching when you're not confident enough, right? If you think about that scene with Yoda in the swamp with Luke Skywalker, because he's trying to make him become a Jedi Knight. And there's this great scene where Luke says, I'm not afraid. There's this like in Yoda kind of says, like, you might be afraid. He's like, I'm not afraid. I'm not going to be afraid. And Yoda's like, you will be. You will be. Like, that is what hubris can do to us, right? Hubris can be like, I'm not afraid. I'm not going to be human. Like, no, you are human. I hate to break it to everybody, unless you're from another planet and you're listening to this, like, you are human. And that means you're going to have some shadows, and you're going to have some things that get in your way. Doesn't make you wrong. It makes you part of what each of us is, a human, fallible human being. But boy, if you want to really develop your game and get as conscious as possible, trading's going to do it to you.
It sure is. And it's, I think one of the greatest things, I've learned from it, and taking it into real life. And it's something I've been thinking on recently. And I've had conversations with a person extensively on this, becoming okay with being wrong. And it's, as a trader, and, I think of Brian Lee, who we both know very well. And I think very highly of him, as I think you do too. He only wins like a 25% ish of his trades. So he's wrong 75% of the time. And like, I think like, me, probably one of my like delusions I've had when I was younger is like, I always wanted to be right. I wanted, or whatever the case, whatever the root of that is.
Sure.
And,
well,
I think a lot of people,
worthiness is the root of that. Because we think we're only worthy if we're right.
Yeah. And
but you're worthy even when you're mistaken.
Yeah. And it's almost a relief to like be like, oh, okay, I don't have to be right about everything in the world. It's okay to like not know. It's okay to be like, oh, I was wrong about this. Let me reassess my opinion, and it's okay. And I think that's actually a beautiful thing to come at it that way, instead of being very like rigid, or just be the
weight that lifts off your shoulders when you no longer have to know everything or be right about everything. Like, think what kind of pressure you put on yourself when you think you have to know it all.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And that's something that, like, I we're so used to being wrong on the other side, because when they train you, and when you start, like in the early 90s, there was no human resources or anything like that. So, they're like, sit over there, don't say anything, right? You're like, can I do anything? Yeah, get me a coffee. Don't screw it up, right? Sit there, shut up. You're an idiot, right? You're like, so there's no, and like, if you speak, they're like, you're wrong, shut up, right? And so that's how they train you. So, you get used to being wrong. That was one thing I was okay with, right? It was
That's
the discipline, but they beat that out of you. It's like
it was like
horses.
boot camp.
Yeah.
You experienced it like true boot camp.
Yeah.
You know, and then boot camp in a way is fabulous because what it does is it gets you, you know, it builds your immunity to discomfort. Right? Why does any military put people through a boot camp? Because they're trying to show you that pain, cold, wrong, maybe being yelled at isn't as awful as you think it is. Like,
I know, yeah. I mean, I had my first client was a Swiss baker, and he would call. He I think his whole method of communication was yelling, right? And, you know, he called, and this was like 1995, 96. He called his assistant his slave, like in front of clients, right? You know, like this is what these guys were like. So, you know, yeah, it was good because, you know, being a nightclub bouncer, it was okay. I'm like, okay, this is no big deal, right? At least he's not swinging a table leg at my head or something, you know?
Exactly.
I could deal with, you know, he calls me an idiot every time he speaks to me, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was different. And then I do see that because I do see a lot of traders and, you know, feeling like where you're right. Whereas on the other side of things, you're always, because I don't know, the business I did was very sort of dodgy, and it was always like running next to a fire carrying a can of gasoline instead of a bucket of water. So you were always waiting for something to go wrong, right? So I had that trepidation in me, and that was actually that was bad sometimes because that would make you hesitate.
Yep, for sure.
Right?
For
that
sure.
would, like, I would see a trade and I'd be like, oh yeah, that would have worked. Oh, why didn't I take it? Well, you know, you just, because you couldn't execute because you think that it's not going to work. Right.
Yep, exactly.
So,
and that's your story just now gives such a great, you know, spotlight to how different environments, different habits, practices have different results. True. And if you've had a collection of different ones, just like JJ has had, right? Like, as you just spoke of that, you're going to have these benefits to that, and there are going to be some costs. So the key is understanding which are which, so that you can better understand how you show up in a crisis. Some people are going to respond really well under pressure, right? Those who have effective decision-making capacities, which is a strong strength of both of yours. You both have capacity to make really great decisions under tremendous pressure when the fire is raging. Not everybody has that. Now, you guys knowing that, it means you can perhaps lean into trusting your effective decision-making in a pinch more deeply, more widely, certainly in a trade. I do make effective decisions. This index indicates that to me, so I can lean in that. And then in a different situation, I have a tendency to be super hard on myself. I might raise the bar to Olympian levels. That might be the place that's costing me. So maybe I start to manage my expectations to a more human level. And so we're going to have these little, you know, facets to ourselves, like a diamond. Just begin to start to get more curious about who you are, how you are. And then all of those things that have happened in your life thus far, start to realize where have they strengthened you? Where might they be blind spots? It's just that simple. It's just that simple and that complicated, you know?
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I wanted to ask, because, you know, to the characteristic you brought up, or the metric, you know, have an effective decision making, you know, under pressure. I would imagine, like, you know, that's what you need to, you know, a quality to be a trader, right? I mean, we have so many different inputs, so many different things we have to make. We have to make a timely decision, and like split second could be like mean all the difference in the world. Someone who scores low on that, let's say you have someone who you're coaching, they score low on that.
Yeah.
Is that going to be a red flag to be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't trade, or is there going to be like, hey, like, listen, we have to improve on this, and is there a path to improvement? What would you say?
It would be a collection of what their other scores are indicating if it's a real cautionary red flag. But yes, there's going to be people who are going to have that along with a few other scores that are going to indicate to me they are not suited to trading. One of the scores, these scores are somewhat, they will change over time. They don't change right away. Like, if you took it a year later, it might be a little different and you've worked on some of what you see in it. But there is one score that does not change, and that is around work ethic. So if that is a score, and that is actually value of work, it's called, and that's on the self side, believe it or not. And what that means is you personally, do you value work? Do you value, being able to get your hands dirty? And there was one score that was not my client, but the organization that, approached me about this, where this person had been living on an inheritance for the majority of his life, and that had ended. And when this person took that score, their value of work was actually quite low. And this role that he was about to step into, they were concerned about that. And the score was indicating he did not value work. Well, is it any wonder? He hadn't had to work for a living. So he had not developed a personal, relationship to work ethic. So if that score showed up along with a lack of effective decision-making, I would definitely tell this person to be very, very cautious about whether that's for them. God knows trading is going to ask a lot of work of you. And if you don't really value that, that's going to be tricky. Not very few people come from an inheritance, but there could be other indicators that they don't value work, and you want to know this about yourself. But there are ways to increase your effective decision-making, but it is a collection of scores that one would look at. Work task, though, your ability to work, I can't imagine any trader, if they don't have that score strong, they're probably it's going to be an uphill climb.
It's going to be an uphill battle. Yeah. I think, another thing this index shedded light on, and then I guess we can move on, but I thought this was a good one that really hit home for me. And JJ, I think you would definitely attest to this one. Cause we have our trading room. And so oftentimes, you get newer traders come in. I mean, we got plenty of experienced, very good traders, but then sometimes you get the new person who comes in, and and you could speak to what the metrics are, for the listeners, but, I was reading the descriptions and going through it, and it was saying that, like, I scored high on something, but what this could lead to is impatience.
Big picture.
Big picture. Okay. Big picture is the metrics that, but what it can lead to, it's like, hey, you scored good, but listen, here could be a downside to this, is that you could be very impatient with people. You could, get fed up, et cetera, et cetera. And I was always like wondering where like that was like, was coming from. And like, so in turn, what this kind of made me, cause honestly, it kind of puts even a positive spin on it in my mind, right? Is that like, oh, okay, I'm actually scored good, but like, I just have to, I don't know what it was for me, but it was like, hey, like I started off, I was new before. I have, I guess maybe a little bit more empathetic with people. And it's like, hey, listen, I was new too at, and just, I guess, dial me back a little bit to where, I'm not, because JJ, you talk about like, the type of environment you grew up in. I played sports, and so it was always very tough. People coach yelling at you. So it was always kind of coming from like a tough, I meant good to people, but it was more of a tough love type of approach. But, maybe some people need a gentler approach, or, it's a different environment now, especially with younger people. And so you gotta know how to communicate with people. And I think that kind of really helped me. And so I thank you, Kim, for that, like, cause it's helped, helping us. And so I'm not, ripping into people, JJ, I guess.
Well, no, I did too. And even me, like, I mean, the way I talk to somebody in a retail trading room versus the way you talk to somebody on a desk is just completely night and day. And Ray, I mean, like, okay, like Ray's old school, like Ray was raised old school Long Island, right? So like, they're not really, let's not talk about our feelings, like get to work. What are you doing? When you're standing there, it's like, what are you doing? Get to work. Right. So that's the way he was. And so was I. Like, I mean, my father was just like, hey, like, they'd literally call you, hey, idiot. Like the Butabi's father, on Night of the Roxbury, they're like, idiot, useless, get to work. That's how they talk to you.
And your monkey brother.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But now the whole, I've kind of been away from society when I was away for 20 years, living in Vancouver, just like, in my own little stock world. And then you come out and see people are a lot more sensitive now, and you can't talk to people like that. Right. So it's different. It's very different.
And sensitive is one thing, but big picture, which you both have really, really strong big picture judgments, your skill set there is so strong that your ability to see the chessboard and all of the movements almost instantaneously is such a strength. And it could be a little frustrating because so many other people won't have that strength. And because they don't, it's a cautionary tale to say, wow, very few will see what I'm able to see. How do I begin to be patient and realize they might need a minute to catch up because I've already arrived to this end result and they're still processing. So it lets you not feel so isolated if people don't think as fast as you. Like, what's wrong with them? Well, nothing's wrong with them. They have different strengths. They process differently. But it's helpful to know that, I have a strong big picture as well, guys. And, with my team, I've really, it's helped me be a better manager because I realized, okay, I'm already at the end of this and they're still talking about it, but I got to let them finish. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So it's recognizing, okay, we get there fast. We see consequences that others perhaps don't. And if anything, then we can encourage them. Hey, what are the consequences? Have you thought those through? And they might be like, no, I really didn't. Okay, but people who have big picture, we can guide others. We can encourage others to look in ways that we do automatically without even thinking about it.
Yeah,
that's true.
It's so big. True. Yeah, no, it's big because it could help me. I think it's helped me align. Maybe people can misinterpret intentions or like mix up like, the words, and so this helps me align my intentions. Or be a better effective communicator or more patient or more, whatever the case is. And so I thought that's been, good. I could be more of a service to other people. So which is great.
For sure. Which you already are though, which your scores show us that you already are a huge contribution to others. And if anything, it would be nice if you turned up the volume on being a contribution to yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true, right?
Absolutely.
That's true. He is hard on himself. I remember when he first started, and because he's and I was like, I remember, Steve going, oh man, I'm like, no, he wants it really bad. He wants it really bad. This is a good thing, right? He's just being hard on himself. He'll relax, and he just relaxed into it. And boom, it clicked. And I know exactly what you're talking about too, because my parents were raised under the old British system, and they used to always tell me, you're so slow on the uptake, right? If you were in London right now, these kids would be running circles around you. You're so, you don't pick things up as quick as you should. So you would always have to I always felt like I don't understand it fast enough, right? It wasn't just to understand it, but to understand it within like 30 seconds. Otherwise you're an idiot.
Yeah. So, that was your boot camp, JJ.
That was, right?
Your big picture score is pretty freaking incredible. So clearly, whatever they did, they put that fire under you to really
put the fear of God into me. That's what they did. They made me think I was an idiot.
I'm sorry. I wish they didn't, but that is definitely one of your strengths for sure, that big picture. And it's, look, we are all going to have our different places where we can lean into, but realizing, okay, others are going to have different ones helps us interact with them at a minimum, right? because then we may at times feel like, oh, I'm able to see this. How come they don't? And it could potentially also eat away at our self-confidence if we think, well, maybe I'm wrong. Why do I see this if they don't see this? But as a trader, if you know that about yourself, that means you might see things on those screens that other people don't.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think this is really like highlighted like the you know, the benefits of all this and how this in there correlates with trading. And you know, it's because I can see it, just sometimes it's tough for this to really stick and resonate with people. But you know, more than likely these are newcomers that don't understand this, and you just got to give it some time, because I think anyone who's experienced knows the value of these things. Kim, I did get a listener question. There was a question from a listener.
Awesome.
And then I have you know, I think I have one or two off the wall questions for myself. The question is, why do most people fear success, and what are ways a person can identify they are feeling success underneath the surface?
That they're fearing success under the surface.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with us being tribal beings. And if you're coming from a poor or middle class background, success potentially means isolation. It means perhaps the people that have been in your life thus far won't be there. Perhaps they will leave you, or you will be bored with them. But either way, to be isolated was death for us, right? Thousands of years we survived as tribal creatures. And when you do start to financially up level, sometimes people can be threatened by that around you, or not understand you or judge you. So I think it's an understandable perspective to potentially be afraid of being alone and not have anybody who's there for you. But also I think the fear of success also can sometimes indicate that you have not worked out your relationship to money. There are people, even on the spiritual level, who think that having money is dirty. Having a lot of money is bad. I still am shocked at how many people are still, that we've been taught that culturally as well, right? That money is the root of all evil. Like there's a whole bunch of catchphrases that are still in our cultural vernacular that somehow imply if you have a lot of money, you must have done something wrong. And I think there's a money harmony assessment that Olivia Melman has. I think it's called moneyharmony.com. It's a free assessment. And one of the terms she describes is a money monk. And that's a person who thinks that the more money you have, you probably are not really a clean person, a honest living person. So those are the two reasons I think success we can self-sabotage around it. T. Harv Eker talks about, in his book, The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, that we have a money temperature, a money set point. And this is why lottery winners or, very young athletes who get a lot of money in a short amount of time, and or traders potentially, right, JT, back in the day, why they can, have so much and then have so little so quick. Because if you have a money set point, let's say it's 68 degrees, then anytime you start to go below that, what happens in your house? Well, the heat comes on and gets you back to 68. And as soon as it gets, perhaps too hot, the air conditioner comes on and takes the heat down. So we have that set point within ourselves, and we will keep equalizing ourselves to that unless we start to investigate, what are my money beliefs? What did my parents think about money? Were they frugal? Were they coming from the Depression era where they never even threw out tinfoil? Like, look at those things, because those are informing your relationship to money.
Yeah. And I know, because you've recommended some books on this topic to me. Do you have any books you want to just give out there for the listeners?
Around money, I'm gonna put forward, besides T. Harv Eker's book, is Barbara Wilder's book, Money is Love. It's an absolute paradigm shifting book, very short, and it interrupts your default setting around money. it's a game changer. Blew my mind away. Blew my mind away when I read it.
Yeah. It's an intriguing topic for sure. Because I don't know, maybe I've had certain delusions as well around it, and then I've seen some of like the people are like, oh, like you can't. It's just a funny concept. People don't think you can obtain a lot of wealth ethically.
Right.
But there's a lot of people that do, and some of the most like I think like moral and ethical people I've met have been like ultra successful. Yeah. And I was like starting to think that I'm like, well, maybe that's a reason for their success. It's because they were like ethical, moral people.
Correct. Because they're in a place of abundance. When you come from scarcity, and that happens in poverty. I mean, I know what poverty is. I know what it's like to not have a home. I know what it's like to go hungry because of different things that I experienced in my youth and the stuff my family went through. And I can tell you that it's really, really hard to not see that as a context for the way you view the rest of the world. But you have to really do the due diligence. And that place of scarcity can stay with you your whole life. Mm-hmm. Where you're always like, afraid. Like for women, it's that they'll be a bag lady. For men, it's probably that they'll, not be seen as a man, because men are culturally expected to be the provider still, even though it may not be happening, which is part of why I worry about a lot of men because of the different things that are out there now. There isn't this cultural education of men where I do identify tremendously with their net worth and their ability to make a certain kind of money, right, JJ? Do you see
totally that? And that whole thing about the fear of success because you'll leave other people behind. I actually went through that. There were 3 of us. We all wanted to be traders. We were all roommates. The other 2 fell by the wayside. 2 years later, I saw one of them. I was in a 7 Series BMW, and the guy who was one of my best friends since we were like 6 years old looked at me like he hated my guts, and I never saw him again. It was just a weird thing that you mentioned that, because I've had that happen. And it was really unsettling, right?
Isn't it?
Because you're like, hey, how you doing? And he just looks at the car, he just kept walking. And I was like, whoa, okay. So that's,
AJ, I just want to say this though, about that was all about him and his stuff, right? Yeah. His stuff, he was measuring him and his own worthiness up against like, well, I don't get to be friends with JJ anymore because he's got more than I do. But that was his own head that did that to him. Yeah. You're ready to still be his friend.
Well, it's like, I'm still thinking like we're 8 years old, right? It's,
totally. But that is an example of a man whose sense of worthiness is all caught up in what he's made. And he feels now he doesn't get to be your friend anymore because he himself has held himself to this impossible standard. Yeah. But that's a guy who cut himself out of being friends with his best friend. Like what a cost that is to him, never mind to you.
True.
It's incredible. Yeah, I think this whole thing with money too, and Kim, we were talking about like media's, like the media and stuff a little bit, and I think as just a general, I guess take across a lot of industries, I think the media loves to focus on outliers. Yeah. And it's like the one guy who made a lot of money unethically, and then people start generalizing like, oh, that's how everyone who's wealthy gets it, or oh, this 10-year-old made $500,000 trading NFTs. Oh, everyone can make $500,000 trading. It's just like the same stuff over and over. And it's like, it's just a little frustrating to me that people are still buying this type of stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's what Hollywood spoon feeds us though, right? What are the movies we see about finance or Wall Street? They're all the greed is good guys, right? That's why I wrote my book, Ray. I wrote my book because I felt like we only heard about the bad guys, the unethical guys. They made the cover of the paper. And I wanted to know who were the guys and women who are able to financially find success and do it ethically, who did it consciously, who did it morally. Was that possible? Where are the examples? Where are the role models for those who want to be a conscious capitalist? And that's, that book I was suggesting people do it after the Occupy Wall Street movement. I thought a journalist should do it, or some, mucky muck who understands finance better than me. And nobody took me up on the idea. And then at some point, I walked past the Strand bookstore, and there's a Toni Morrison quote in the window that said, if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And I was like, damn it, I got to do this book. And that's how it started. But it was so inspiring to me because look, I'm an entrepreneur. I want to have that financial success, and I wanted role models that I could do this ethically, consciously, with integrity. We need those role models.
Yeah, I was saying, we had, there's an example, Tom Basso, he was on our podcast. And, I remember saying to him, I said, Jesus, if you had been my boss 30 years ago, my life would have been completely different, I wouldn't have been in this box of stress continuously, for decades. Right.
He's a special man. He's a special man. But let me say this to you, JJ, and to you, Ray. You guys are role models. You guys are lighthouses on that dark and rocky shore to so many people. I'm honored to be, in your lives at all, because when I first saw you, Ray, I met Ray before I met you, JJ. I was like, wow, this guy cares. This guy's got a heart. This guy is super smart, but he gives a damn. And, look, those are the people I like to spend my time with. I like to spend my time with people who are the lighthouses on the shores that are rocky and dark and confusing. So just know that you guys are, maybe JG, you didn't get those role models when you were coming up, but damn it, man, you've been able to transmute that into becoming an incredible role model to human beings now in this market. And you too, Ray. And that's, it's everything. It's everything.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. That's too kind. Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
The truth.
So we got, all right, let's see what else. Kim, are you still, what's your routine like these days? I know you used to get up in the morning and row, correct? Paddle. Yes. Paddle. Man, are you still paddling, getting up at the crack of dawn?
Yes, except for these last 2 months because I hurt my back for the first time ever. I really didn't understand back pain before.
Oh, no.
Like, people said their back hurt. I was like, kind of like, what's the big deal? Now I get it. So yeah, I used to get up at 3:45 up until 2 months ago, 2 days a week, and then 5:30. 3 days a week I'd paddle on the ocean, and I can't wait to go back. My chiropractor thinks I'm about ready to go back. So I do Pilates, I do outrigger paddling. Outrigger paddling though is my favorite because when you're out on the ocean, besides the sea creatures that are out there, we have dolphins a lot that swim with us when we're out there paddling. And you have to focus on so many parts of your stroke that you can't go into your head. On one hand, you're focused on your rhythm and being in time, and you have to be sure you're in the right position and posture. But it's like a moving meditation for me. I can't worry about, business or work or get all caught up in the minutia of life because I have to focus at paddling. So and this was something I wanted to say earlier too, for those who feel afraid of trying meditation, start with a moving meditation. Maybe it's running, maybe it's walking in the woods, maybe it's paddling. If you're lucky enough to have, an ocean and it's not frozen over, find a way to lose your intellect in a process of repetition. That's why paddling is beautiful. Being on the ocean, being in there, watching the sunrise is beautiful too. But more than anything, it allows me to lose myself in the oneness too. It makes me see how small I am, how small my troubles are. When you're out there on the ocean, seeing all of these creatures swimming with you underneath, the whales, we're right in the channel between Maui and the Big Island is where all the humpback whales come for giving birth to their calves. And I'll tell you, once you experience that incredible conscious being called a whale, you're just like, oh my God, like what are we thinking with this planet? Like these beings are so magnificent and so in tune, that it just reminds you in a healthy way that you are humble, that you are small in the scheme of things. So it helps ground me a lot.
Yeah. I think about like before me coming to meditation, you're talking about the moving meditation. I think that's what always like working out has been for me.
Yes.
In a sense, and even before I came to actual meditation, I bring up the paddling. JJ likes to bust my chops about this story, but I went canoeing. I don't know if it's the right word, but it was a boat that had a paddle, but it was more of a relaxed thing down here in Florida.
Could be kayaking.
I think this was what I was doing. I was kayaking, but it was at like a state park on this little river, and I'm going through blah blah blah, and then I see 2 alligators in the water. This was not a peaceful, serene experience. My adrenaline clicked in, but my sharpness came back. I was like, whoa, that was
close call. What we do have sharks here in Hawaii. And I'm usually in a big 700-pound, 6-man canoe, but there are 1-man canoes. And I did have a fellow paddler from my canoe club, Kauai High Canoe Club, shout out to them. In her 1-man, a shark came and, she was okay, but that shark was moving her 1-man up and down. And luckily, she must have effective decision-making because she leaned on her ama and just kept, because she could have easily flipped into so that is part of what probably makes some of these tasks exciting, right? I'm getting my need for adventure met every time I'm out there.
Sure.
I'm also out there in the pitch black, and you can't really see when there's no moon on the ocean. So is it a bit of a risk? Yes, I feel comfortable with that risk, but still, it also reminds you how fragile life is, right? Which
absolutely
is, we're going to die. We're all on our way to dying. It's going to happen, hopefully not right away tomorrow, but it could for some of us. And the key is like, are we embracing our life to the best of our ability? And when we're exposed to nature, I think it reminds us, maybe it's a little closer than we want it to be.
Yeah. I think you would love talking to. We've had him on the podcast twice already. He's one of like the newer market wizards. Jason Shapiro. It's so funny. We were talking about the same concept too of like how people think so highly of themselves, or they think like they can time the market. They're the outlier, when it's like these are all just the delusions that people are telling themselves. And it's no coincidence he like meditated in Burma for like 30 days with monks. This guy, you never like expect it from this guy. You know what I mean? So some Jersey guy, some guy from Jersey, traveling all around the world, but he's a big meditator too. So I was like, oh, okay, that's yeah.
That's beautiful. And I love 10% Happier. That is written by Dan Harris, who is a anchorman for Nightline for years. And he himself, his book, 10% Happier, before he started the app, he talked about the pressure he was under as a network newsman. And it's a lot like working in finance and being a trader. Incredible pressure to perform. Split second, has to be perfect, just like finance, JJ. That whole incredible pressure, and he took to drugs to navigate it, and then he had to break down on national television, and he was kind of like, if I don't get this shit together, I'm gonna have no job. And meditation and his journey around that is what 10% Happier is all about. So that book is one of the books I'll recommend to people who are hesitant to even consider meditating. Like, are you kidding? I could never do it. I'm like, you know what? Read this book, because he talks about how hard it was for him and how he found his way in. And now he has an app, and that app allows you to, in teeny tiny little chunks, begin the concept of not even meditating, but just noticing, like you talked about before, Ray, being the observer of yourself. He has excellent teachers and guides around how you can do this in small ways, even in the midst of a busy day.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, let's see what else I got here. Okay, probably like last thing we'll touch on, because I got to thank you for me reading fiction now, and me actually loving fiction. You recommended me, which I love. It's probably my favorite fiction book right now that I've read, at least East of Eden.
Wow.
Absolutely amazing. And I didn't know I could learn about life, learn about myself by reading a fiction book, which is incredible. What's next? What's up next for me to read?
I'm going to recommend The Midnight Library by Haig.
Midnight Library.
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
An incredible book at looking at how all the choices we make, no matter how small, impact not just ourselves, but those around us, including strangers. And it also is fascinating. My perspective has shifted since reading it around regrets, even small regrets. They feel like they have dissolved for me as I, contemplate the story. It's a fiction, story of a woman looking at a lot of her life regrets. And when she gets an opportunity to go back and change those regrets, they don't all turn out the way she thought they would. And that was very eye-opening for me.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to it. And I guess uh, the talks we've had today, and like me being strong, big picture, I guess makes sense. And I know a lot of times people look at me like I'm crazy, or people are like, "What are you talking about?" When I say that, like, East of Eden, like reading East of Eden has helped me trading. How does that even correlate? I'm not even sure necessarily, but like I know, like me, there's been so many different things I've looked at, and then I could like that's helped me be a good trader, or how being a trader has helped me be a better father, or et cetera, et cetera. And I think everything's intercorrelated, and people just embrace that, I guess, as I think what I would say.
Well, ultimately, as a trader, your ability to imagine the person on the other side of your trade is going to only strengthen you. There is somebody on the other side of every trade. And if you are not connected to what that perspective might be, how can you be so certain of your perspective? Fiction automatically escalates our empathy. We get to stand in the shoes of people that are very different than ourselves, who look at the world very different than we do. And when you get more exposed to other perspectives, how can that not increase your ability to be more tuned in to what is happening in the market? There is an energy every day in that marketplace. Are you connected to it or not? And fiction, in my opinion, helps us be all connected, not just to the market, but to ourselves and those around us.
Yeah, incredible. I think we'll end on that note. And so, Kim, really appreciate you coming on for the second time. I feel like we could talk forever. You know what I mean? We go, almost 2 hours now. I think the last one was pretty long too. I really appreciate you, JJ. Parting words. Oh, did we lose him?
Maybe we lost him. But can I just reiterate that?
I'm right here. Sorry.
Oh, good.
I think my headset had disconnected from the thing. Sorry about that. But sisters, thank you so much. Mahalo nui loa.
Mahalo nui loa to you, JJ.
I so much appreciate everything you've done. Kim's helped me, personally and in work too. And she's just, she's a national treasure. So please, take a look at her stuff. I really can't, recommend anyone more. I'm just completely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, JJ.
Very great. Very, very grateful.
Thank you so much. You're both so gracious. Right. And remember, traderdiscipline.com if you guys want that free ebook about discipline. I'm going to give it. It's a little site just for your listeners, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Trader Discipline. Do you want to speak like tell them a little bit about it, or just tell them to go check it out?
It's going to reiterate probably a lot of what we talked about today, how discipline is, usually what every trader struggles with, and how nuanced it can be. So, it's a short ebook, but it does tackle a lot of what we talked about today by way of how you can increase your discipline if you are willing to, look a little bit underneath the covers of who you are.
Yes, excellent. And so with that, does conclude today's episode of Confessions of a Market Maker. If you guys enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review it for us. If you'd like to join JJ, myself, and its board of community traders, you join us at microefutures.com. make sure you guys go check out the ebook. We'll put the link in the descriptions, Kim, for listeners. Go out and get her book, Transforming Wall Street. I had to bring this on screen to show you because I didn't think you believed me that I actually had the book.
I believe
So I wanted to check it out.
like seeing it. It's fun to see you have it in your hand.
Yeah. So that's, for those watching back on the video. So Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be in
Thank
touch.
you both. You guys let me wax on. Thank you.
Absolutely. So for the trading coach, I'm Paulie Walnuts. He's the gorilla of House Street. You stop, so.